All right, hello. This is the fifth lesson on my lecture series on how the United States is starting a new Cold War. Today, we're going to focus on the fallacy of Russian expansionism. All right, and we're going to examine Russian expansionism in the Middle East and Russian expansionism in Europe. All right, to see what's really going on as opposed to what people think. Uh, All right, before we start that, we're going to start with a brief review to kind of try to put it into perspective. All right, so a quick review of the evolution of how you make profit off of war. Right, and the first stage was classic empire building, in which you expand territory to control more resources, both human and material. The second stage dealt with mercantilism to control transportation routes, especially through seaborne trade routes for the purpose of arbitrage. And then the third stage was colonialism, which was an advancement of mercantilism by adding upstream integration through penetration of inland territories, especially with mechanized transportation. Although it started before mechanized transportation, but especially with it. Now, the key difference here is that they're very similar, but mercantilism, you could say, this era, focused more on getting control of a trading port as opposed to expanding inland, right? And then the fourth stage is the modern industrial wars, which involve many more clever and sophisticated ways of making money off of war, which I explained to you, including mass production of high tech weapons, machines allowing for mass production, high tech allowing for more significant profits. Now, this is a very much condensed version of the diagram I gave you here. All right. Hopefully, you remember this. All right, and you learn something from this, or at least you know you can go back and review this if you need to. So now, historically, the U.S. has been and continues to be an extreme warmonger nation, right? Completely opposite of what the average American believes. And we're constantly fighting expansionist wars as well as multiple wars at the same time, so that the USA has fought 2.77 wars every year of its existence. All right. Now, this is absolutely undeniable fact. All right. I mean, you know, I have no idea how people who want to lie will deny this. I mean, all you have to do is Google U.S. wars, list them out when the wars occurred year by year, all right, and you see the pattern. You see that almost from the get go, from 1607 and the establishment of Jamestown County, we've been in constant war. Red, as you recall, is against Indians. It's constant war every damn year. And these are expansionist wars. Right? We're taking territory. We're moving in. All right. Uh, the Indians aren't trying to push us into the sea. All right. We're pushing them back year after year so that we started with a tiny little football sized little, colony at Jamestown, and we took the whole damn nation and then moved overseas. Now, this is the start of the United States. You can say that this is our real declaration of independence, all right, when we started the war. And then we fought the American Revolutionary War. It lasted a number of years. And then we fought Indian wars. All right, here are some mercantile wars, the Quasi War, Barbary War. All right, War of 1812. I talked about that. That being an expansionist war, also. Creek War, First Seminole War, Texas Indian Wars, right? Mexican American War, total expansionist war. And then by the middle of the 19th century, we're fighting, many wars at the same time. Seven in a year, seven, six, seven, six, five, six, six, seven, eight, eight. All right. Many wars at the same time. Most of them being Indian wars. And then we're expanding overseas into the Philippines. We're expanding our control of resources in Latin America and the Caribbean, fighting all the banana wars. All right, it's been constant wars. All right, so and then we have the Iraq invasion war. Okay, uh, so I mean, I don't know how people are going to deny that, but I know they're going to try. And uh, this is such a simple, blatant, obvious, undeniable, absolute fact that we fought these wars that cannot be denied, except through the Sergeant Schultz or Treasure Sierra Madre Bandito methods of self delusion. Right? I see nothing. I know nothing. I hear nothing. And you know what? This is the truth. The masses will not retain facts. I'll just show them this list, and it'll escape their mind. What? You didn't prove anything. I don't remember you any wars. How do you disprove this? I mean, I don't know. It's gonna happen. All right. Or the Mexican banditos. Facts? We don't need no stinking facts. Intelligence? We don't need no stinking intelligence. Honesty? We don't need no stinking honesty. We got social reality. What everyone's saying. And that be for real. That's the truth. All right? I mean, I swear all they'll have is social reality. If everyone's saying it, if everyone's saying a 5 to 10 second blurb, right? That is truth. You can read it on your phone in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Oh, I know what's going on. I know what everyone's saying. That's what's real. God, I swear it'll dominate. And the USA has conducted many clever tricks to start wars, manipulating the Congress and the American public into wars. I've taught you so many cases. Many times I've taught you these over and over. I mean, I just hope something sticks. And these methods work every single time. Why? Because the masses don't remember history, and history repeats itself. Because they don't remember, they get away with the same crap over and over again. And the masses will scream stridently, "What? I can't be fooled. You can't fool me. I'm too smart." And they'll be manipulated every time, and they won't even know it. It'll just, go right over their heads, and it'll work. Okay, so the next section here, I decided I wanted to try to divide up U.S. wars into eras. We talked about the different epochs of war as far as different ways of making profit. So I want to divide the U.S. up into that. All right, and I say here at the end that I fully expect the liars to attack and shift focus on this because I'm not providing any facts here. I'm just creating categories, and it's based upon the facts in my mind. All right. Now, if you don't know any of these facts, you're not going to see this. All right. Okay. All right. So I bet you this is going to be attacked. All right. So the first era I say is from the Alta of Jamestown in 1607, and after this, the majority of the U.S. wars have been for classic empire building. And this was due to the United States' vast opportunities for territorial expansion and resource development. All right, so Jamestown is in Virginia. Virginia is somewhere around here. It's a little hard to see, but it's no more than a football field in size. All right, think of your high school football field, no bigger than that. And from there, we went and took the whole damn continent and expanded overseas as well. We took, Pacific Islands, took Alaska, but we also controlled resources throughout the world. All right. Now, only so this is classic empire building, and I'm willing to bet some people are going to argue we're not an empire. Well, what did I say empire building is? Wars, taking territory. You cannot deny the fact that U.S. has taken territory. All right, taking territory from someone, from the Indians, from the British, from the Mexicans, from the Spanish, from the French. We're expanding. We're fighting someone taking their territory. All right. Even when we purchase stuff like the Louisiana Purchase, well, what right did France have to that territory? What right did Spain have to that territory before Napoleon wrestled it away from Spain? Right? I mean, the Indians lived there. So what did we have to do? We had to go kill the Indians and kick them off. All right. And that's just the way it was. All right. It's been bloody and brutal expansion. I know that people have the capacity to believe whatever they want to believe, but you wonder how they can do that. Uh, so I say only a few of our wars were mercantilist wars. Things like wars against the Barbary pirates who are attacking our commerce. But you can't let them do that. Or the quasi wars where the French were attacking our commerce because we're trading and we have a treaty with their enemy, the British. Right? And then the British turned around. Well, what happened was in 1806 or 7 or so, Napoleon set up his continental system, which he basically blocked trade with England, with the whole continental Europe. And then England responded by throwing a blockade around the continental Europe so no one could trade with them. So they started interdicting our ships, forcing our ships into British ports, you know, forcing British goods onto our ships. And basically, that was a means of Britain selling goods to the continent, was through U.S. ships, right? All right, so that was the British Orders of Council of 1807 that ordered that, right? And some say, well, the War of 1812 was a mercantilist war because they're doing it. Well, I'll tell you what, only 5 days after we declared war in Britain, and the War of 1812 was in June, only 5 days later, the Britain rescinded the Orders of Council, all right, taking away that excuse to go to war with them, all right? Don't tell me it was a mercantilist war. All right, then beginning in the 1830s, you had industrial machine production being applied to weapons manufacturing, and the U.S. Civil War was the first war in which saw the mass machine production of weapons and munitions. However, the Civil War was less an industrial war in this sense here, modern industrial war, than it was a war to determine what type of economy we're going to have. All right, so what do I say here? Oh, more award to determine the prevailing economic system of our country, whether we would be one, a third world backward primary product producing colonial minion to Great Britain, subservient to and supporting their industrial economy, or we would become an industrial manufacturing economy of our own right, capturing the far greater wealth that comes from value added, right? And driven by the economic system of Western expansion, railroad construction, and resource development, an integrated system here, which was really only a copy of European colonial expansion. Now, where the Europeans did it by expanding colonies overseas to get the raw materials for their industries, going hand in hand, we did it in our own backyard simply by, starting wars with other countries like Mexico, or and also starting wars with the Indians and taking their land. All right. Now, American historians tend to call the Spanish American War our first colonial war. And in regards to Cuba and Philippines, the U.S. taking of Cuba and Philippines, it was. I mean, people are going to say that we didn't officially take Cuba, but we essentially took Cuba economically. All right. Now, but in the larger national economic sense, the Spanish American War was mostly a mercantilist war for the expansion of commerce into Asia and China. All right, that was the main purpose. That was the whole idea behind Mahan's strategy. All right, I explained that in the last lesson. Um, Now, the USA's colonial career actually began earlier than the Spanish American War, starting around the mid 19th century. The Spanish American War was 1898. Well, a good 50 years before that, we were expanding commercial investment and railroad construction into Mexico, then Central America, as well as we're expanding in the Caribbean islands, U.S. commercial interests, right? And all this then eventually culminated in Teddy Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, As you recall, the Monroe Doctrine of 1823 stated that, hey, Europeans, you stay out of Latin America. That's our backyard, right? You can't colonize. You keep what you got so far. You mean there was a little bit. There was French Guyana, British Guyana, Dutch Suriname, but nothing else. Now, Teddy Roosevelt came along and he said, all right, I'm going to expand the Monroe Doctrine. I'm going to say the U.S. reserves the right to invade and intervene in any Latin American country at will. Right? That was essentially the Monroe Doctrine. And that resulted, in banana wars. You'd say the Moro Rebellion in the Philippines, and countless other U.S. military interventions. Now, if you look up U.S. military wars, right, you're going to see many wars, but you're going to see even more military interventions, smaller scale, short-term interventions, short enough that they're not wars, right? And this also includes, as kind of an aside, all the filibuster wars. Now, these weren't official U.S. wars, but they were usually sanctioned by, at least with a wink and a nod, approved by the U.S. government, especially taking away pieces of Mexico, right, before the whole Texas Revolution, right? What these filibuster wars were private initiative wars. Private, guys getting the funding together, right, the manpower together to go down and try to take a territory and claim basically their kingship over it, right? So you got some American down there claiming to be king in wherever in Central America somewhere. You can look that up, filibusters, right? And you'll see they started around those also started around the 1850s. All right, the USA's modern era of industrial wars did not begin until World War One. All right, and has since then has been dominated by the U.S. power elite. I showed you how the power elite have started these wars. Right, we're integral to these wars. All the same guys from the same club making profits through their corporations. Right. Now, I don't know how you're going to deny that. I mean, you can just find that on their own websites, the history of their companies and who they're connected to. Now, World War One marked the start of the U.S. military-industrial complex. So you could say that the World War One was the first modern industrial war for the U.S. World War Two was our rare good war, all right? Largely because we're fighting some pretty serious evil and a pretty serious threat out of Nazi Germany and, to a lesser extent, Japan. Both were fascist and militaristic. More recent wars, including all the conflict the U.S. has created in the Middle East. I hope you remember some of this. I really, I don't have much faith, but I hope someone remembers something. And the Iraq invasion war have involved more sophisticated methods of making profits and wealth. Um, through like control of commodity prices, oil, for example, indirect control through conflict, balance of trade, especially with the sale of weapons, log cap contracts, private military security contracts, reconstruction contracts. All these are methods of making big money off of war. Weapons manufacturing, enforcement of the petrodollar demand, flipping client states, even making U.S. debt, for which you monetize debt and you increase the money supply, from which you gain seigniorage. All right. Currently, the United States is fueling a new Cold War in which Russia is being portrayed as a principal boogeyman and an expansionist threat. But also, China is being, China is aggressive, trying to get whatever it can take, right? Iran and North Korea being portrayed as boogeymen, you know. But Russia, but is Russia expanding in reality? I'm not talking about social reality, which is so wacko reality, right? I'm talking about real reality, not what people believe. Based upon what's being passed, the expected immediate response from the typical, know nothing, and this sounds cruel, but I tell you, they're not going to know any facts. They'll say, "What? I know all the facts." They'll know nothing. If you ask them, they'll know nothing. You ask them about U.S. wars, the average person will know zero, right? Or next to zero. Yet uncontrollably self-serving Americans will scream, "Bullshit! America doesn't start wars. We be good guys. Bad guys start wars." I mean, I just proved how the U.S. starts many wars over and over again, usually with the same methods, but the masses retain nothing. All the wars, I swear, if I ask them how, for example, you know, uh, how did the U.S. cook up the Gulf of Tonkin incident, right? 99.99999% would be able to tell me nothing. Self-serving masses believe what they want to believe with the help of social reality, which is one, it's simple, stupid garbage that everyone is saying in a 10-second blurb. I mean, that's it. Written at a fourth grade level, based on no facts. All right, it's just what everyone's saying, and that's what people do. Right, to find out what's true, they go to their phones. It's quick and simple. They do no research. They see what people are saying, and they can read a blurb in 10 seconds and say, "Oh, okay, I know what people are saying." All right, and then that becomes a reality. Right, you would think that no one is that stupid, but I swear, right, it's like 99.999% are. So I'm thinking it cannot be stupidity. No one's that stupid. It's got to be more a social psychological phenomenon. Now, based on or just simple laziness, you know, based on one word reality, like social reality is based on unbelievable, unreal, crazy, conspiracy theory. That's true because everyone's saying it. Or it's based on blind emotions like anger. Man, people get angry, they'll believe whatever they want. Resentment, self righteousness, right? I had a person scream to me about the Mexican American War. That was a great patriotic war. What are you talking? I mean, what is a great patriotic war? What are the facts behind it? They'll know zero facts behind it, right? They're adamant, they're indignant, and their relentless self-serving drive to please self. Right now, this is human nature. This is the way people are wired. Right, we're all wired to please self. It's the rare person who really follows what is true and honest and sacrifices. Most people will cut corners, twist and fudge, distort to believe what serves what they want to believe. A simple joke that mocks and ridicules and thus destroys perceived credibility based upon nothing. Now, people will say, "Oh, I won't fall for that." I swear, they all fall for this all the time. Every time they pass a joke, this will dominate their perceptions of truth. He's a joke. You don't believe him. It works every time. Based on what? Is there any facts in a simple, stupid joke? No. Or any other ad hominem attack on perceived credibility. And the CIA plays a lot of dirty get you games to attack credibility, right? And the purpose is to shift focus off of the facts and intelligent analysis. And people won't remember the facts or intelligent analysis. So what dominates, if you can, get people to believe that person lacks credibility, that's going to dominate. Not facts they don't know. Any other ad hominem attack on perceived credibility to shift focus off of the facts and intelligent analysis. Oh, okay. The power of social reinforcement, which makes people believe things that have zero basis in real facts, zero basis in reality. But if everyone's saying it in a big tidal wave, in a big a cascading waterfall of people, oh, that is real for them, based on nothing. It's called social reality. It's a social psychological phenomenon. Social experiments prove it all the time that if everyone's saying it, people believe it's real. Now, I've taught this thousands of times, and you would think that no one would at this point would fall for it, but they continue to fall for it forever. If everyone is saying it, that's the basis of reality. I mean, you just wonder, how is that possible? But it's true. Now, nearly every single case of social reality mass belief has no basis in fact, intelligent analysis, right? It's only a simple blurb. 10 seconds. What do you have in that? But that works perfectly because the masses know no facts or intelligent analysis. Therefore, social reality is, plus it's so easy. All you got to do is go to your phone. It's like, I don't know, you know, what's an analogy? I don't know what an analogy. Now, so there's, you, the average person does not retain all these facts. They won't, right? They'll say, they'll laugh and ridicule. They'll make a joke. He's a fool. He thinks we won't remember. But if you ask them any of the facts, they'll come up with nothing. Zero, right? They'll say, I'll remember everything. No, you ask them, they'll come up with zero. That's what's real, right? They're not operating from a base of knowledge and facts, right? And they'll do no research on their own. You think they'll lift a finger to do? They won't lift a pinky to do any research. Oh, but they'll pick up their phones and see what everyone's saying. That's easy. There's no effort there. All right, and that becomes a reality. Social reality, which is simple, stupid, and baseless, will be the only reality they know. But in their minds, they know reality. They'll get all indignant and angry with this, but it is a simple fact, a simple truth, right? They won't know the facts. All they'll have available to them is social reality. And if everyone's saying it in a big tidal wave, then that's true, right? Can they understand how ridiculous that is? Apparently not, right? Because they always fall for that. Now, to have a Cold War or any war, you have to have an enemy, at least a perceived enemy. If you don't have one, then you got to manufacture one, right? As everyone knows from the historical use of propaganda, perception is largely a product of portrayal. So the way you portray something and then you propagate it everywhere controls perception. All right, that's been proven over and over again. So how is Russia being portrayed today and being perceived today? Well, they're being portrayed and perceived as a dangerous military aggressor, right? With expansionist ambitions, and who aspires to recreate the glory days of the old vast Russian Empire or the old vast Soviet Union, and is led by a devious dictator, Putin, right? Now, some of the above is partially true. For example, I think Putin is a clever, tricky scumbag, right? But most of this is just total outlandish bunk, right? In fact, it is so out of touch with reality, it is laughable. It is a joke, right? And I'll show you what a joke it is. I'll start off by examining Russian expansionism. That's the purpose of today's lesson. We're going to study the fallacy of Russian expansionism. All right. So we'll look at Russian expansionism in Europe and in the Middle East. So first of all, we'll look at Russian expansionism in the Middle East, and we'll do this through an examination of client states. Now, if they're highlighted in red, they're Soviet Russian client states. If they're highlighted in blue, they're USA or Western client states. All right. Now, during the Cold War, the client states were roughly split. You had Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq being Soviet and then Russian client states purchasing their weapons. You also had, I guess you can add in there, Sudan, Somalia down here, right? But these are less significant, definitely less significant in terms of resources, no oil or gas, right? No pipelines passing through here, right? I mean, little strategic value, right? Key areas are up in this area, all right, in the Middle East. All right, and then in blue, they were Western, like Iran was a U.S. client state, right? All these countries down here, the Sunni countries here, plus the Shia country Iran there, right? But that all flipped, right? Iraq, we just invaded Iraq, flipped Iraq. Right? I told you that one of the benefits of war in the Middle East is flipping client states. All right. So Iraq used to buy Soviet weapons. Right now, what do they buy now? All U.S. all right, U.S. F-16s, U.S. M1 Abrams tanks, U.S. artillery, M777s, the 777s, plus the mobile 777 version, the 155 millimeter, very effective artillery battery, very accurate, and everything else from Humvees to MRAPs to M16s, and you name it. All right, Jordan, Egypt. I say Libya didn't really flip. Libya is just a mess. Libya is a failed state, a constant war. Two main warlord groups here. There's one in the west that's Western. There's one in the east that's mostly UAE backed, right? And they're buying weapons from wherever they can get it. They're buying weapons on the open market. Internet purchases. They're buying stuff from Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. They're supplying stuff. UAE is a big supplier, right? And then Russia and USA buying stuff from USA, right? Anyone they can buy weapons from. All right. So now all of them have flipped except Syria. Iran is not in the U.S. camp anymore, but neither is it really in the Russian camp. I'll show you. I'll show you in a second. Um, so I say this: Middle East client states, which were once relatively balanced between, Russia, Soviet Union versus U.S., right, have now shifted heavily away from Russia and toward the USA, right? While the USA is expanding, Russia is barely hanging on with only part of a single client state, Syria. I mean, they may have some little minor stuff like Sudan, Somalia. I don't know if they do anything in Yemen. I know Iran is a big proxy of, or I mean, Yemen is a big proxy of Iran, right? But these are insignificant, both in terms of resources, pipelines, and strategic value, right? Um, okay. So Syria is their last client state that's significant, which is busted up. Iran isn't much of a client state in terms of weapons purchases. So let's look at the history of Iran's weapons purchases. All right. So we'll start at 1953 when the CIA MI6 uh, uh, cooked up a coup, overthrew the Iranian democracy, and installed a dictator, the Shah. Right. From then on, they started purchasing, small amounts of U.S. weapons here. It started to build up in the late '60s, and if you notice, it got significant about 1973 or so. This is the year of the Yom Kippur War, which resulted in the big Arab oil embargo, which jacked up oil prices 4 times, which meant a flood of U.S. dollars going over to the Middle East. All right. And I had read the government documents, statements by Nixon administration officials back then, back in 1973, discussing arms sales to Iran, and Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury were commenting, right? And they're saying, hey, we need to sell weapons to Iran to balance trade, to recycle currency. We're going to have a big currency problem here, right? And so you see there's a huge increase in weapon sales to Iran. Iran is buying all sorts of U.S. weapons, top of the line weapons that were just coming out at that time, F-14s, M60 battle tanks, you name it, we're selling to them, all right? And of course, in the '80s, during Iran Contra, we're selling TOW and Hawk and whatever, right? Giving them intelligence. All right, all right. I don't know why that's not here. Well, there should be at least a little blue in there. All right. So what happened is in 1979 you had the Iran Revolution. U.S. arms sales came largely to a screeching halt. Maybe a little bit there it shows, right? But who picked up the case? Well, I don't know. Some other nations. I don't know who they are. But China's in yellow and Russia's in red. Russia had some spikes here in the early '90s. This is after Russia's Soviet Union's fall, right? And trying to make some money here, right? But it's dwindling off until it's like nothing, right? So Iran pretty much relies upon its own weapons industry, right? For the most part, Yeah, right. It recently bought some S-400 surface-to-air missiles, right? But it's not buying much. It's not much of a client state of Russia. All right. Uh, Now the question is flipping these client states just random, accidental, or is there a U.S. policy to do this? Is a U.S. plan to do this? Let's take a look at the testimony of General Wesley Clark, right? Four-star general, supreme commander of NATO, right? He mentions that he came across a U.S. plan in this Department of Defense plan to overthrow the governments of 7 countries in 5 years. And I'll show you this. All right.
Went back to those comments, and he said, I just want to tell you, sir, thanks for reading my book, and, he said, thanks, that's all the time I've got. Really? And I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorists. And
oh, nothing was further from the truth. Nothing fueled terrorism. Terrorism explode. The whole fundamentalist movement exploded after we invaded Iraq. In fact, especially in Iraq, there was very few, far between, religious extremists, and they're hiding out in UN, U.S. protected, no-fly zone, Kurdish Iraq. Right, about 200 of them. Saddam Hussein's hunting down the rest, executing them when he can. He get a hold of them. And he was trying to infiltrate an Al-Qaeda related group in northern Kurdish, protected by UN, Iraq. All right. But it was after we invaded that they flooded in. Right. They went from about 200 to 10 times that, over 2,000.
you know, it's like that old saying, he said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset. And then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001, he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991, he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a 1-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, if you ever get to Washington, come look me up. They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way. And I was bored in the Pentagon. And I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called him up there. He was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time. And he brought me in. And I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict? We're going to invade countries? And my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went.
All right. God bless General Wesley Clark. I think he's an intelligent man, but he doesn't know U.S. history. Right? We have a long, long history of overthrowing governments, of invading other countries. Right? He says here, what does he say here?
A nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict? We're going to invade countries? And
We've done a lot of that. Holy moly. All right. Okay. So, yeah, key thing there is he discovers the Department of Defense plan to overthrow, to flip 7 countries in 5 years, right? So 2001, U.S. plan to overthrow the governments of 7 nations in 5 years. Iraq, Iran, starting with Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, and Lebanon. Well, you know what? We played duck role in Iraq and Libya, right? We were crushing Iran there. Okay. Now the only full client state Russia has left in the Middle East is Syria, and much of that has been stripped away. For example, here's a map from March of 2019 showing the different areas controlled by different groups. All right. Now there's many different colors, meaning different groups, right? But the red is the Syrian government with under Assad, right? It's roughly half, or maybe a little bit more than half, right? They only have half the country left, right? The rest is this is Kurdish area. This is like a Turkish rebel area here. Um, Now, as a client state, Syria purchases Russian weapons. Okay, so Russia wants them for that. Also, I think even more important is Tartus. It's a port city right around here, and that is also Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean, and thus it is highly strategic. Also, Syria is strategic because it is a potential route for oil and gas pipelines. I know Iraqi oil goes through Syria already, all right, but there's a lot of push for uh, you know gas pipelines. I know was it Qatar and Saudi Arabia. One of their goals is to get a natural gas pipeline going through here, tapping into the Turkish pipeline, the Trans-Anatolian pipeline. Right. I'm not sure if that's still a hot item still. All right. but it's got a lot of potential. So it has a lot of strategic value, not just in military bases here, but economically. All right, so plus there's oil in Syria as well, especially in the northeast in this Kurdish area. There's oil. Um, all right, so number one, the U.S. had a plan to flip 7 client states. Right. Two, we took military action to do so, both in Libya and in Iraq. Obviously, we invaded Iraq and overthrew the government and flipped them from a Russian client state to a U.S. purchasing U.S. weapons, and we controlled their oil. We controlled contracts over there. Three, U.S. pro democracy NGOs have been operating in the Middle East in support of the Arab Spring. They've also been operating in Ukraine and in Russia, right? Now, these NGOs destabilize governments through communication, propaganda, and organizing, fomenting protest movements, which have overthrown governments. These are not just minor little things. They're not like, hey, a bunch of guys marching up and down, a city block holding pickets. These have overthrown governments, like the Maidan protests, which resulted in the Maidan Revolution, which brought a pro-Western government to power in Ukraine. Right now, the granddaddy of these NGOs, these pro-democracy NGOs, was the National Endowment for Democracy, which was it's funny that it's called a non-government organization because over 90% of its annual revenues are directly from the U.S. government. I mean, that is a total government instrument, right? The rest comes from like these right-wing policy think tanks and some from corporations and so forth, rich donors. All right, we'll give it to the NED. And the founder of this organization was this guy here, Alan Weinstein. And he said, I'll give you his direct quote, what he exactly said, but I couldn't fit it all in this small section here. Um, but he essentially said, hey, you know what the CIA used to do as far as their covert operations to overthrow governments, destabilize and overthrow governments? Well, back in the 70s, a lot of that started coming to light, and there was a lot of blowback, a lot of flap. Is the term he used was flap potential or something like that, flap, right? Right, which is blowback. He said, now we've taken over. We're doing essentially what the CIA did in overthrowing governments, but it's out in the open. And if you do it covert, well, there's blowback. But if you do it out in the open, it looks like it's just a pro democracy thing. But you're doing the same thing. You're This is exactly what these covert communication, propaganda, fomenting protest movements, fomenting oppositions, right? Arming an opposition, right? Well, they don't have to arm an opposition. All they got to do is create a protest movement, and it explodes. Just like 2014, the Maidan Revolution. All right. And he said there's no blowback. He said there's no flat potential. All right. Now recall that flipping client states is one of the economic benefits of war in the Middle East. Right? There were once buying all sorts of Russian stuff, and there are all contracts with Russia. Well, now it benefits you. All right, summary. Is Russia aggressively expanding in the Middle East or defensively trying to hang on to its last remnant, its last strategic point? Now, you could say, I don't know what Russia's doing in Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon. Those were ex-clients of the Soviet Union, right? But these lack oil and gas. They have no pipeline value. They have little strategic value, right? They're throwaways. Why even bother with it? The last critical one is Syria, right? And Russia's lost half of that. No doubt they're trying to hang on to Tartus right here, roughly around there. So who is being aggressive and expansionist? Who is creating conflict? Who is starting wars, right? Who is applying military support for overthrows? USA. Now, do you remember, right? I mean, Iraq, in Libya. Do you remember the long history of U.S. conflict creation in the Middle East? I mean, no. I mean, I can't teach it again, right? So I'll flash through it, and I'll say that I say it many times. I say, the masses will retain nothing, all right, and then people will attack that. He's crazy. He thinks we'll remember. You know what? If I ask anyone, they'll come up with zero. This is my lesson on exchange theory and how exchange theory was used in U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. All right. If I ask 99.9999999% of the masses about this, they'll come up with nothing. Right? Maybe if they're lucky, one little thing, but there's a ton of information here. So I explain the basis of exchange theory. I explain what exchange theory is all about as far in terms of power. I explain examples, many examples of the use of power in exchange. And let's see. And then I talked about Admiral Woolsey, the director of the CIA, and how he said OPEC has to be destroyed. Right. And then I talked about the importance of oil, why it's so critical to our economy. And then I talked about different methods that we used using exchange theory to regain control of oil price, right? The key of which was the fifth one, the creation of conflict in the Middle East to regain indirect control of oil price. And then to prove this, I went through historical development of the oil industry, and then up into U.S. dependence upon Middle East oil, U.S. actions involving Middle East oil, beginning with FDR during World War II, and then our first big overthrow, which was in the Middle East, was the overthrow of the Iranian democracy in 1953, right? Installing the dictator, the Shah, all right? And on, all the conflict we created in the Middle East, including, fueling both sides of the Iran-Iraq war, supplying weapons to both sides, supplying intelligence to both sides, all right, extending that war, milking that war, and how that war was proved very effective in lowering oil price, right? Um, and there's a Stark incident, right? Then the first Gulf War, I told you about that, right? How it wasn't simply Saddam invading Kuwait out of the blue, right? And then I told you about what else here? Well, the Iraq invasion war, all right, and how we screwed up the handling of that, right? The worst possible way. Let's see here. This is a brief review of the history of oil price. All right, and this is all the many ways to make money off of war in the Middle East, especially within oil-producing nations. All right. Now, if I were to ask people to tell me something about this, they'd get nothing. So none of this is real in their brain because there's none of they know none of this. How is right? What's going to dominate is whatever 10-second blurb is passed in social reality. The cascading waterfall of all dominates. It's a flood. What is that? What's the base of that? Nothing. All right. So is Russia expanding in the Middle East? No. They lost everything. They're just desperately hanging. The last key thing they're trying to hang on to Syria. That's it. That's all they got left. And only half of it. Now let's take a look at the big threat of Russian expansionism in Europe. All right, so I want to show you, it's like a before and after. All right, this is the before. This is during the Cold War. You had the Soviet Union here in red. You had its satellite countries and the East Bloc countries here. These were all communists. This is East Germany. That's Poland. That's Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. This is Albania. This is Yugoslavia. These are all part of the East Bloc. Yugoslavia was communist, but uh, they kept outside the East Bloc, right? They stayed independent. All right, so that's the way it was. It's extending. Now on the other side, you have the NATO countries in blue, starting with Turkey, Greece, Italy. All right, that's Sardinia. I didn't know that was part of NATO. How about that? All right, all the way to Iceland. Okay, all these, right? Sweden, I guess, was, but Finland wasn't. I think Sweden now is not part of NATO, I guess. But Sweden and Finland have joint exercises with NATO, so they partner with NATO, right? All right, so now let's look at the encroachment. So the Soviet Union fell apart. This is no longer part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states here. All right. So all these were part of the East Bloc. These were part of the Soviet Union. Right. East Germany's part of NATO now. Poland's part of NATO. Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, part of NATO. What the hell is this? Slovenia, right? Croatia is. Romania, Bulgaria, Albania is, right, and then Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They're all part of it. You see how NATO is pushing right up against Russia. Now, Ukraine is not part of NATO, but after the Maidan Revolution of 2014, a pro-U.S. government, not U.S., pro-Western government seized power. Right? This is a pro-West government, although not part of NATO. Now, Belarus has traditionally, since the fall of the Soviet Union, been in Russia's pocket. They've been connected to the hip with Russia. They've been highly dependent upon Russian hydrocarbons with their crap economy, right? Subsidized hydrocarbons. Well, guess what? Even Belarus is being cut away and is moving towards the West, right? I guess the president, I believe, is trying to play both sides, right? Play both angles here. Yeah, making a power play both ways. I don't know. He's trying to benefit somehow that way. But to the extent that Belarus is purchasing U.S. oil, right? Now they got pipelines going right through there, right? Russian. Right? Why you gotta buy U.S. oil? All right, any money. I don't know what's going on with that, but U.S. oil has to be shipped from the United States, right? Where is that from? Like the southern United States, Louisiana, maybe somewhere down there, right? And then it's got shipped by tanker. Then it's got to be pumped by pipeline. It's got to be offloaded and then pumped by pipeline to Belarus is landlocked, right? So you know that oil must be subsidized in some way for them to buy U.S. oil instead of Russian oil, which is right. It's got to be subsidized, and that's got to be a power move by the U.S. to make inroads. So even Belarus is being cut away. I mean, that's speculation on my part as far as the oil there. Why would they buy U.S. oil? Think about it, right? When you would expect it to be much more costly, had to be shipped by tanker, and then by pipeline, anyways, right? All right. Anyways, that's speculation. The U.S. is moving in here. They pushed in with NGOs here, supported the whole Maidan thing, supported the pro-West movement. All right. Now, in terms of European client states and military allies, is Russia expanding or contracting? I mean, what does Russia have left? Belarus. That's it, right? Oh, right here. Oh, I'm sorry, Belarus, right? And which is both worthless and is being cut away by the West, right? All told, what does Russia have, right? I mean, that's significant. Russia has part of Syria, Armenia. Armenia is here. I mean, what is that? What is Armenia, right? No pipelines go through there. They have no resources. They're dependent upon Russia support to defend against Azerbaijan, right? Um, and they got let's see here, and they got Belarus, which are losing, right? Russia's being pushed back everywhere. Russia's being pushed. It's back against the wall. It's basically right. It's jammed them up right to its borders, right? Russia's being pushed back. Russia's not expanding, right? Russia's weak, right? Russia's being cut away at. Now, I expect, you know, lying attacks, some simple-minded attacks here, right? And they'll try to shift focus upon things like this. Well, NATO membership is voluntary; it's not forced upon them, right? Ooh, duh, okay, but so what? NATO membership is a military umbrella that is no less a threat to Russia, right? And then they'll say, well, NATO is a defensive military alliance. That's not offensive. Okay, but do you think expansion of NATO military umbrella, encroaching upon Russia cannot be used offensively? For example, giving NATO membership to Ukraine, who has been stealing Russian gas, not paying for gas, big bills building up for non-payment, and contract violations, right? Ukraine has been a bad actor, right, in terms of Russian gas, and 80% of Russian gas used to go through Ukraine. They were highly dependent upon Ukraine, who was stealing their gas, right? Plus charging transit fees, right? They're causing a lot of problems, right? Now, you give the military umbrella, right? You can expect far worse, right? And that's why Russia's been scrambling to bypass Ukraine. So 80% of their gas used to go through Ukraine, but now they built the Nord Sea 1, going to Germany, right about there, I guess. Nord Sea 2, which comes from up here, right, and comes to Germany right about the same spot. They built the Blue Stream earlier than that, which is really to bypass this route that went to Turkey here. Used to go through Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria. Now they went straight across here. But they also built the Turk Stream, which goes right to here. Turk Stream 1, Turk Stream 2. Now they're being attacked by U.S., sanctions, right? U.S. is attacking them. We'll talk about that in the next section, right? Uh, right. But you see how NATO expansion can be a threat to them, right? It's not simply a defensive alliance. You give NATO military umbrella, man, that can cause Russia big problems, right? All right. So I'm trying to get you to understand this situation. I'm trying to show you that Russia's not an expansionist threat. Hell, Russia's got his back against the wall. Russia's being shoved and pushed, right, and kicked to the floor here, right? They're being pushed back everywhere. All right. Um, that's the fallacy of Russian expansionism. Okay. All right. I attack that. Oh, that's not real. I don't. All right.